Right, good night all. So I just wanted to make a short video on not fearing Allah, right? This contrary to what you all read in the Quran, right? About fear Allah, and there's in multiple verses that we should fear Allah, right? But I just want to change this perception of it because it is a perception, right? It's not reality, it is a perception, right? The idea that you should fear the entity that created you, fear the creator, right? Is not something that I like or like to hear or like to propagate, right? That viewpoint that we should fear the creator or fear the one who made us before our parents made us, right? So and I just want to address this because this is one of the things that perhaps has people fearing or being coward to explore the way of life, right? So if you keep telling people fear Allah, you won't really, in my estimation, is going to discourage people, right, from exploring the way of life. And the way of life is beautiful. There's beautiful teachings, guidelines, right? If you want to further into practices and so on, right? There's a simple way of life, is a practical way of life, and is a beautiful way of life, right? It doesn't really have anything that you should fear, right? To say you have to fear Allah or fear the entity that created you. So that's kind of like a misrepresentation, only because some of us might misunderstand what the word fear mean, right? Um, Allah is not going to be feared. First of all, you need to get over the fear of saying the word Allah or saying the name Allah, right? Because so many of us grew up with different names, right? And these names were representatives of these names, representatives of Allah were idols and our people that we worship as idols, right? So the first step is really to get in our way, right, from that adoration that we have towards the idols, right? And getting over the fear of actually just say the name Allah, right? Because the name Allah is actually very powerful, right? The name Allah is powerful, right? Um, and praying to Allah is actually powerful, right? So the first step really is to get over the fear of the name, right? And that was something I had to get over as well, right? I had a problem when not a problem, but a issue within myself now. Like when I now started exploring this religion, it was like, or the book, right? It was like, okay, so what's the name of God? Like, what's the name of God, right? Um, and well, remember, I was introduced to Vedic Hinduism as a child, right? So I would have thought of God as Om, right? Aum, right? And learned that, well, this is the sound of the universe, right? The creation sound. The sound, Om is the sound that the universe makes at creation, right? Or during creation, or sound of the entity, the universe, the planets, and so forth, creating a sound, right? But then when I started reading the Quran now, I was like, well, there is to be, if there's sound, right, there is to be a creator of that sound, right? Because I can't have sound without something creating the sound, right? What creates that sound that the universe makes, right? So that was my question. What creates the sound that the universe makes, right? I had also thought about and came across the concept of Shiva, right? Shiva, right? But when you think about Shiva, right? Shiva, you tend to think about Shiva as an idol as well, sitting meditating on a mountain, whatnot, right? Shiva is also described as a formless being, right? I posted on WhatsApp with the beautiful chant, the Shiva chant, right? Describing God as not neither this nor that, right? None of scriptures, none of idol, none of anything, right? None of rituals, none of practices, right? But God as a formless being. Shiva is also like can be captured in that, right? So there are different names that people use, but when we think about certain names, right, it tends to associate it with an idol or image, right? And that's why some of us might have an issue, right, saying the name Allah, right? Because when I say the word Allah, you really don't have any, especially if you're accustomed years of worship, right, and polytheistic practice and so on, both Hinduism and Christianity, right? You tend to have something to focus on, right? Some imagery, picture, right? Something to focus on, right? Um, So that is why people might have a fear of just saying the name, right? And in addition to this, people have the fear of different groups around the world, right? That invoke that kind of fear too, and fear by stereotypes, right? So stereotypical views, right? Fear of how Muslims dress, right? In terms of the covering over their face and so on, and you don't know, right? That is one. So it's about understanding too, right? It's about developing and understanding one, right? And two, right, is about getting over the fear of what might be considered extremist views, right? Extremist Islam views, right? So it's two things to get over, right? Extremist fear of extremist practices and fear of stereotypes. Stereotypes being that which others propagate, right? Or things that are partially untrue, right? That might be true or untrue about the religion, right? That people tend to um, propagate as truth, right? Regarding the religion, and it might be untrue or true, right? Stereotypical views then, right? So it's just a couple things to get over, right? This is just for people who want to be introduced to the way of life, but they have a fear of it, right? There's nothing to fear, right? Regarding saying the name Allah, right? Like I say, is a powerful name, right? And the phrase La ilaha illallah is a powerful phrase too, right? Meaning that there is no other God worthy of worship but Allah, right? Um, it is just a social reconditioning, right? A cultural reconditioning, a social reconditioning, right? It's not anything like somebody is forcing you, right, to say that name or anything like that. It's just a something that if you was in polytheistic practice and trying to get out of that, right, it's just something to socially recondition your mind about, and will the Quran helps with that process, right? So when you read about the verses that say fear Allah, it's not really like fear Allah, right? Allah is the creator, Allah is the sustainer, right? So there's essentially nothing to fear about the one that creates and and the one that sustains, right? There's nothing to fear, right? The Vedic way of life speaks of God as creator, sustainer, and destroyer, right, or dissolver, right? Um, that might invoke more fear, right? Because you're talking about destruction, right? And that might invoke more fear in people as well. So God on the whole has a component of creation and destruction when the time is right. But the idea now, right, is again to a frame of mind that you be guided by, when you're guided by the words of the book, right? You lose that fear, right? So that fear coming, that fear now could be developed if you're not adhering to the the guidelines of the book, right? Not saying that you had to follow what the book saying word for word, right? I'm saying that there are guidelines in the book, right? Simple guidelines, right? Simple guidelines. Not a big thing. It's not a. It's like I say, it's a real simple, practical way of life for people who really don't know about Islam or want to get into Islam, right? It's not like, and I am not even like this big practicing Muslim as in to go and do the prayers or go to mosque and whatever as the way that I do it. I just read, I just telling you all based on what I was introduced to via the book and having a discussion based on it, because I like conversations, right? I like religious conversations, right? So it's very simple things, right? Of practical living. It are no big set of rituals, no big set of nothing like that, right? And that's why I think is a nice way of life, right? For people to move forward with, right? Because it's progressive. I think simpler way of living is actually more progressive, right? Simpler religion is actually more progressive, right? Um, when they have these complex religious practices and stuff, I think that it tends to tie you up in a lot of things that you're trying to get out of, right? Especially the younger generation and stuff. You're trying to get out of certain things, be it food, be it dress, cultural wear, dress, food, all these things, right? So I is a lot of even in the say clothes for example, right? There's a lot of things in religion that you could simplify clothing and all, right? You see, long ago people would wear all the real beady outfits, right? Indian wear a lot of beads on the outfit and heavy outfits like that. I don't like them things, right? So I think that like life should just move forward in a very simple direction, in a simple way, right? Just to make life more complex. Because what's the point? There are people who are creating who, when we go to buy an outfit like that, how many of people give thought to how much work it takes to sit down to sew, right? To sew that entire outfit that you wear, right? With all the complexities in it, right? They would go and pay two, three, four, $5,000 for an outfit, maybe to get married, maybe to for a funeral, right? Maybe to get married, right? Maybe to go to someone else's wedding, right? And how many times do we sit down and think, oh, this is real actual work, and it's probably like slavery, right? It's probably like this work, I don't know wherever you're doing it from, where India, wherever, right? And it's probably these people are working for, or for businesses that have them actually slaving, right? In order to produce this one outfit for you, because of the amount of um beads, right, and adornment and dressings, right, that they have on that one outfit. It's so heavy, I think it barely walk in it, right? So how many people give actual thought to say, well, hey, I should probably think about the work, right? People sit down and hand sewing, right? All these heavy adornment outfits, right? Rather than they're just picking out, this is a simple wear, maybe I should wear this. So that's how far I just go in thinking when I'm thinking about, what I choosing to wear, right? Because people, you produce things because people demand it, right? Businesses produce things because us consumers demand it, right? So that's why there are businesses in the world, right? Because we demand certain things, right? So we're talking about cultural way and so on, and how we could help, right, the world move into a more simpler direction. Because there's actually elegance and simplicity, right? People don't always have to wear all these big sort of, right, wherever. Like you can wear something extremely simple and be extremely elegant at the same time. For those of you who are looking and fashionistas in that regard and whatever, right? But the point is to just move towards a simpler lifestyle, right? And I think Islam is pretty good. If you read the Quran, there's so much verses that talk about these things, right? So much verses, right, that elaborate on these kind of these concepts, right? All in, I don't like to say preparation for death all the time. I hear talking like that all the time, right? But it is not even that. It's a preparation for is life and death preparation, right? That's what that book is really about. Is a preparation of living and dying, right? Because how we die is how we live, right? Our mentality at death is how we live, right? So it's a formula basically. Is as a formula, a guideline and formula for living and for dying, right? That's what the book is. So I just want people to not to get turned off, right, by some of the verses that you might come across, right? Because there are verses that could turn you off, honestly. If you're, for example, Hindu or Christian, and you're now reading the book, or if you're Baptist or whatever religion, right, and you're reading the book, and you might get a little turned off by some of the verses, right? But is to really focus on the message, right? Focus on the message of the book, and the concept of fearing Allah. You don't have to take it in that literal sense of fearing, right? Is in fearing. I think that probably turn people away a lot from the way of life, right? The fearing is to, and I tired and will talk about fearing as in fearing consequences. I would have done that in previous videos, like talking about fear and consequence for wrong action, because the book talks heavily about mercy as well, right? And forgiveness and mercy and all these things. Not to say that that you have the liberty to be doing wrong things over and over, right? But there's a certain amount of um I don't know how to put it, but the book talks about it as mercy, right? Allah's mercies towards you, right, is ongoing, right? And I think if we think about it like that, right, we kind of want to do the right thing, right? So if you think about Allah's are going to be fair, right, you have an opposition, right? You have an opposition. But if you think about Allah as a merciful God, you actually want to become closer, right? You want to develop a personal relationship and so on, right? And that's how I prefer to think about it like that, right? Instead of thinking about it constantly as, oh, you have to fear every single thing you're doing, right? You have to fear and you know you're not really doing anything wrong at the end of the day, but thinking about it is, oh, like everything you're doing, you had to just watch what you're doing because you had to fear consequences, right? And I don't like to have people live in that frame of mind, right? I would have spoken to that effect in the past videos, but thinking about consequence for every single thing you're doing, right, is not a nice way to live, really. When you know that you're really not essentially doing the things that you're doing is not like outrageously wrong or anything like that, right? So for the most part, if you're following the guidelines of the book and so on, right? So there's just a message to kind of counteract certain things I would have said, and probably how I would have said it in previous videos. And if I never like the term fear, but if I had crossed anybody like in terms of how they felt with regard to when I talk about fear and consequence and all this thing, right? Just to soften that a little bit because I myself, right, have a problem with that kind of conversation, right, at this time, right? So anyhow, this just give some comfort to people, right, if they're going through that process and having difficulty in accepting certain things as real, right? So have a good night, everybody.